Hey guys, tonight we begin with an empire. One that built highways before Google Maps, aqueducts before plumbing, and bureaucracy before email. The Roman Empire, a civilization so obsessed with efficiency that it conquered half the known world, mostly to improve its water pressure. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Rome didn't begin as a marvel of civilization. It began as a swamp, a glorified campsite full of shepherds yelling at each other across a river. And yet somehow those same muddy people built an empire so advanced that 2,000 years later, we're still impressed and a little suspicious. By its peak, Rome stretched across continents, commanded oceans, and invented bureaucracy just to keep track of how great it was. It could supply fresh water to millions, dispose of their waste, and then schedule a gladiator match for dessert. No empire before or since has managed to make indoor plumbing and public slaughter look equally glamorous. The secret to Rome's success wasn't divine favor or luck. It was a lethal mix of discipline, paperwork, and unrelenting competence. Roman engineers didn't dream about flying or philosophy. They dreamed about drainage. These were people who looked at a swamp and thought, let's build a city here. It'll be hilarious. They had no electricity, no power tools, and not a single YouTube tutorial. Just geometry, slaves, and raw determination. And somehow it worked. Their cities had heated floors, functioning sewage systems, and running water. At a time when most of Europe still thought rain was witchcraft, Rome's genius lay in its obsession with control. If nature didn't cooperate, they bullied it into submission. The thirst of an empire. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine the outskirts of ancient Rome, somewhere around the 1st century AD. The sun is gentle in the morning sky, not yet intense enough to turn the stone roads blistering. Before you lies a landscape that appears deceptively quiet. Wide fields of wheat bending lightly with the wind, clusters of olive trees shimmering silver green, and low hills dotted with humble farmhouses roofed in terracotta clay. There is a peacefulness in the stillness of the early hours. Nothing hints at the existence of extraordinary engineering hidden beneath the soil. In this calm scene, farmers begin their slow work. A pair of oxen plod steadily along a furrowed field. A woman pours grain from a woven basket into a clay pot. A shepherd nudges a flock across dry pastures. The landscape feels ordinary, almost unchanged from generations before. And yet, beneath the earth and stretching far beyond the horizon, the quiet heartbeat of an empire pulses through channels carved by human hands. For centuries, Rome had struggled with a fundamental challenge: water. In its earliest days, before marble temples and sprawling markets, before imperial triumphs and legions marching across continents, the city relied entirely on the Tiber River for survival. People carried water in clay jars, walking long distances each day. Wells were dug, but many ran dry when the scorching summers arrived. Rainwater collecting in cisterns was a blessing but unpredictable, sometimes plentiful, sometimes absent entirely. As Rome grew into a sprawling metropolis with hundreds of thousands of residents, the basic necessity of clean, reliable water became a daily crisis. Imagine the smell of the river during the hottest months, stagnant water mixed with waste, rotting vegetation, and the runoff of growing urban life. Imagine the frustration of waiting in long lines at public wells, unsure whether the bucket lowered into the darkness would return full or empty. Imagine the constant anxiety of living in a city where something as simple as a cup of water could become a matter of survival. Without water, there could be no bakeries, no fountains, no bathhouses, no dye workshops, no metal foundries, no armies, and no navy. Without water, Rome would remain small, fragile, and forgettable, just another settlement that would one day vanish from memory. Rome's leaders knew this truth. While history often remembers emperors for their conquests, monuments, or political intrigue, many of Rome's greatest achievements were not dramatic battles, but infrastructure, the slow, persistent building of systems that allowed people to live, trade, and expand. Water, more than military glory, became the quiet foundation of Rome's power. And so began one of the most remarkable engineering endeavors in human history, the aqueducts. The birth of the Roman aqueduct system. The first aqueduct, the Aqua Appia, was constructed in 312 BC under the direction of Appius Claudius Caecus, the same man responsible for laying the Via Appia, one of the earliest and most important Roman roads. The aqueduct stretched roughly 16 kilometers from its source to the city, most of it running underground. It was built this way not only to protect it from enemy sabotage, but also to stabilize water flow and limit evaporation in the Mediterranean heat. It was a modest project compared to what would come later, but at the time it was revolutionary. Water flowed into Rome continuously and without labor, carried by gravity alone, an idea that seems simple but required exceptional precision. The slope had to be steady and almost imperceptibly gentle. Too steep, and the water would rush uncontrollably, damaging channels. Too shallow, and it would stagnate or stop. The Romans developed tools like the groma and the courbates, which looked like wooden frames, plumb lines, and leveling boards. To modernize, they resemble primitive carpentry tools, but they were capable of measurements that remain impressive even today. One can imagine the surveyors kneeling in dusty fields, sighting along the horizontal boards, adjusting stones beneath the legs of their instruments, calling out measurements over the sound of hammers and chisels. Their work required patience, not glory, not speed, but accuracy measured in fractions of a degree across many kilometers. Their names do not survive in monumental inscriptions. Their faces are forgotten. And yet, they built the veins of a living city, the expansion of the system. Over the next 5 centuries, the aqueduct network grew dramatically. By the height of the empire, Rome relied on 11 major aqueducts, with a total length exceeding 400 kilometers, a distance greater than the distance between modern-day Rome and Florence. Some, like the Aqua Marcia, carried water from sources nearly 90 kilometers away. To cross valleys, Roman engineers built towering arcades of stone, creating the iconic arched silhouettes that still stand today. If you stand beneath one of these arches in the countryside, you feel dwarfed by their quiet magnitude. Sunlight filters through the spaces between the columns, forming stripes of shadow across the earth. The arches appear rhythmic, steady, and eternal stretching into the horizon like the ribs of a colossal skeleton. And in the silence, you can almost hear water flowing above, invisible, gentle, unending. Water for the people. The Romans believed deeply in the concept of public benefit. Water was not merely a necessity, it was a civic right. Public fountains, more than 1,000 of them, were scattered throughout the city, flowing constantly. Anyone, rich or poor, free or enslaved, could drink without payment. Clean water was a symbol of civilization, of order, of the promise that Rome made to its citizens. But providing water to the people required more than stone channels. It required planning, law, and organization. Water first flowed into large distribution tanks called castella, where the pressure was managed and water was separated into different pipes, some for public fountains, others for baths, others for industrial uses, and only a small amount reserved for private homes of the wealthy. Engineers maintained a delicate balance, observing the flow, repairing leaks, and monitoring distribution. They inspected channels through access shafts built at regular intervals. They cleaned sediment tanks and patched cracks. Every day, teams of workers, often enslaved or lower-class laborers, walked long distances through tunnels lit only by torchlight, clearing blockages and scraping lime deposits from the stone. The work was thankless, repetitive, and physically demanding. But without it, the entire system would fail. Water supported the empire not just physically, but socially. The famed Roman bathhouses, which could accommodate thousands of people each day, were more than places to wash. They were social centers, full of conversation, business, reading, exercise, and rest. Baths were heated through complex furnace systems called hypocausts, which required enormous amounts of water to maintain comfortable temperatures. Bakers relied on water for dough and steam. Laundries used water mixed with ashes or urine for cleaning garments. Tanneries softened hides. Metal workshops cooled molten bronze and iron. Farmers irrigated crops. And ordinary households drank, cooked, and cleaned. Every drop of water represented the invisible work of thousands. The fragility of perfection. From a distance, aqueducts appear permanent, carved from stone, built to endure centuries. But in truth, they demanded constant care. Earthquakes cracked foundations. Erosion wore away at channels. Mineral deposits slowly choked the pipes, narrowing the flow. Invaders destroyed arcades in military campaigns. Sabotage by rival politicians seeking to embarrass opponents was not uncommon. Corruption spread through the water administration system, with hidden illegal pipes siphoning water to private estates. Entire teams of legal inspectors were appointed by emperors to walk the system and enforce regulations. Even natural elements conspired to cause problems. Roots broke into underground channels. Worms and insects clogged mud filters, and rainstorms shifted soil enough to collapse tunnels. And always, the greatest threat was neglect. The moment maintenance stopped, decay began. Imagine a cracked arch, barely visible at first, spreading slowly with each change of season, the mortar loosening, stones shifting. A small leak becomes a stream becomes a flood, and eventually, the structure fails. For now, however, in this first chapter of the story, the aqueducts stand unchallenged. They are monuments of silent strength, monuments built not to celebrate victory, but to sustain life. Water flows day and night, quietly shaping the fate of millions. The fountains continue to sing in every square. The baths continue to steam. The bakeries open before dawn. The workshops clink with metal and heat. The empire thrives. And yet, a question lingers beneath the serenity. What happens when the system that sustains everything begins to falter? How does a civilization endure when its most essential lifeline begins to fail? The flow of power, plus or minus 2.000 words. You find yourself walking slowly through Rome during the height of the empire, perhaps sometime in the 2nd century AD, the era often called the Pax Romana, a period of relative peace and prosperity that lasted more than 200 years. The city around you is vast and buzzing with life, its population approaching or exceeding 1 million people, making it the largest urban center the world had ever known. Stone-paved streets weave through a dense network of buildings, markets, temples, bathhouses, workshops, apartment blocks, and government offices. The air carries the mixed scents of baked bread, olive oil, burning wood, and the sharp tang of iron from metal workers hammering in narrow alleyways. But beneath all the noise and movement, there is a quiet and constant pulse flowing invisibly through the city, the steady movement of water brought by the aqueducts. Rome now has far more than the humble aqua appia that began the story. Massive stone arcades cross the countryside, carrying water over valleys and low plains, some towering more than 30 meters high. Some structures run underground for dozens of kilometers, hidden beneath layers of earth and rock. Others stretch across open landscapes where arches form long pathways of rhythmic shadows across fields. From the distant springs and mountain sources, the water travels continuously, never stopping, never reversing, never hurrying. It simply flows, at the peak of engineering excellence. By this era, the Roman aqueduct system has reached its peak. 11 major aqueducts feed the capital: Aqua Appia, Aqua Aniovitus, Aqua Marcia, Aqua Tepula, Aqua Julia, Aqua Virgo, Aqua Alciotina, Aqua Claudia, Annio Novus, Aqua Triana, Aqua Alexandrina. Together, they bring an extraordinary quantity of water. Modern estimates suggest nearly 300 million gallons, 1.2 million cubic meters, every day. It is difficult to imagine such volume. If you were to stand beside the main distribution reservoir and listen, you would hear a low, constant roar, a sound like distant wind or ocean surf, though you are nowhere near the coast. And yet the distribution of water is so well organized that most citizens rarely think about the scale of what surrounds them. Aqueduct water enters Rome through enormous castella aquae, or central distribution tanks. From these reservoirs, water is separated into different stone or lead pipes heading to public fountains, bathhouses, industrial workshops, gardens, and private residences. The water supply system functions like the veins of a living organism, controlled, directed, and delicately regulated. One of the most impressive examples is the Aqua Claudia, completed in 52 AD after nearly a century of construction and dedicated under the reign of Emperors Claudius and Nero. It stretches more than 60 kilometers from its spring sources, and its final approach into Rome is carried by the magnificent arches that still stand today near the Porta Maggiore. When new, the stone blocks gleamed bright white under the sun, and the clean, cold water that traveled through its elevated channel was considered among the purest and best tasting. Nearby, running even higher above it, arcs the Anio Novus, one of the most ambitious aqueducts built by the Romans. It carried water from the upper Anio River, collecting it through carefully designed settling basins intended to remove silt. Because the river was prone to seasonal flooding and turbulence, engineers designed complex systems to redirect murky water and stabilize flow. It was the result of countless inspections, revisions, and repairs over generations. The quiet army behind the water. The aqueducts are impressive, but the people who maintain them are perhaps even more remarkable. Their roles rarely appear in the grand narratives of emperors and battles, but without them, Rome would collapse. You can picture them now. Teams of maintenance workers descending through narrow stone shafts into dark inspection tunnels lit by oil lamps. The air is cool and damp, echoing softly with the sound of trickling water. Workers move slowly along narrow walkways, scraping lime deposits from the stone, clearing sludge that settles in quiet pools, and chiseling away minerals that cling like bone to ancient channels. They crawl into tight spaces, widening cracks and sealing leaks with mortar mixed from volcanic ash and lime. The same material used in Roman concrete, a substance so durable that many of their constructions still stand today. Above ground, others climb ladders to inspect tall arches, checking for loose stones and fractures. They listen to the sound of water through pipes, learning to detect pressure changes by ear. They measure flow with simple wooden gauges. Every day, they record amounts and pressures, noting fluctuations and irregularities. It is repetitive, tedious work, but entirely essential. The Roman government recognizes this importance. Engineers are given official titles. A special bureaucracy called the Curator's Aquarum oversees the entire water system. Under them work scribes, inspectors, masons, plumbers, surveyors, and labor teams. Their reports are detailed, outlining not heroics, but measurements, the boring but vital information that sustains infrastructure. Some documents survive to this day, and they are shockingly mundane. Listings of pipe diameters, stone weights, flow volumes, repair frequency, and the salaries paid to workers. There is something quietly beautiful about this administrative routine. Empires are usually told through dramatic turning points and vivid personalities. But here, history survives in numbers and logbooks. The politics of water. As water becomes more abundant, it becomes more powerful, not just physically, but politically. Control of water access begins to shape influence within the empire. Senators petition for additional conduits to private estates. Wealthy households bribe inspectors to install illegal pipe branches, siphoning supply from public fountains to lush gardens. Competing interests spark disputes over ownership, maintenance responsibility, and distribution priorities. The Roman writer Frontinus, appointed water commissioner in 97 AD, dedicates himself to reforming the system. In his surviving treatise De Aqueductu, he documents widespread corruption and inefficiency. Illegal tapping of aqueducts has become so common that water levels drop significantly, threatening supply to essential public services. He orders pipe networks to be examined, unauthorized branches removed, and precise measurements standardized. His writing is calm, analytical, deeply technical, and profoundly practical. A perfect example of the quiet genius of Roman engineering culture. His concerns are not philosophical. They concern pipe sizes, flow calculations, and enforcement of water law. Through such dry technical management, Rome sustains life for 1 million people. The social significance of water. If you walk through Rome's bustling streets and follow the sound of laughter and conversation, you eventually arrive at a public bathhouse. Perhaps the baths of Caracalla, among the grandest ever built. It covers more than 25 hectares and can accommodate thousands of visitors daily. Stepping inside, you feel the warm, moist air rise around you. Marble floors glisten. Cold, warm, and hot pools reflect the flicker of torchlight. Massive vaulted ceilings stretch overhead like the inside of a cathedral. Water flows endlessly into pools, fountains, steam rooms, and ornamental cascades. To modern ears, the idea of public bathing may feel ordinary, but in the ancient world, it is revolutionary. It is a symbol of equality, a space where senators sit beside laborers, where merchants and poets share conversation, where strangers debate philosophy, news, and politics. Bathhouses are open daily and remain central to Roman culture for centuries. They would be impossible without the constant supply of water brought by aqueducts. Outside, in public squares, fountains flow continuously. Children splash their faces. Women fill containers to carry home. Travelers stop to drink. The sound of water becomes part of the rhythm of daily life, a comfort and a promise that the empire endures. Hidden weaknesses. Yet even in this golden era of abundance, there are cracks beneath the surface. The aqueducts, despite their durability, depend on unbroken maintenance. One weakened arch, one poorly cleaned channel, one neglected inspection could become catastrophic. Rome's reliance on its water system becomes both its strength and its vulnerability. In the countryside, farmers complain that aqueducts divert water from their fields. In the city, tension grows between public needs and private privilege. When drought strikes or repairs shut down a major aqueduct, lines at fountains lengthen, tempers flare, and markets struggle. Bakers cannot produce bread, bathhouses close, laundries stall, and the poor wait hours in crowded streets for a chance to fill a jar. Small failures create ripples that widen into waves. And beyond Rome itself, the empire faces pressures, border conflicts, economic instability, political corruption, and shifting priorities. Aqueducts represent stability, but stability requires constant attention. The calm before decline. Imagine standing beneath the towering arches of the Aqua Claudia at sunset. The sky glows orange and purple. Shadows stretch long across the ground. The stones are warm beneath your hand, their texture rough with age but solid beneath your palm. Water murmurs softly overhead, hidden but present, steady and unchanging. The structure feels eternal, anchored into the earth not just by mortar, but by the belief that Rome will last forever. But history teaches us that nothing is immune to change. Not empires, not engineering marvels, not even systems built with perfection and persistence. For now, the aqueducts remain strong. The baths are full. The fountains flow. The city thrives in a golden glow of abundance. And yet, the question begins to echo quietly. What happens when the quiet work of maintenance is no longer done? What happens when the hands that preserve the lifeblood of an empire are gone? When the water stopped flowing? You stand now at a very different moment in Rome's story, not during its triumphant height, but centuries later, sometime in the 5th century AD. The air is different now. The city no longer buzzes with the same confident energy. The once crowded streets feel thinner. The stone buildings, once polished and gleaming beneath the Mediterranean sun, show signs of fatigue. Cracked facades, worn steps, broken columns lying abandoned in dust. The scent of baking bread no longer fills every district, and the laughter emerging from massive bathhouses has faded to silence. The fountains, which once sang constantly with fresh flowing water, now run weakly or have gone completely dry. The aqueducts still stand in the landscape surrounding the city, their silhouettes unchanged, their arches still reaching toward the sky, but the steady invisible pulse that once ran through them has weakened. Some are partially broken, others completely abandoned. Weeds grow along their bases. Grass sprouts between the stones. Dust settles where water once moved like lifeblood. To fully understand this transformation, one must look not at a single dramatic moment, but at the slow accumulation of pressures that built over generations. Pressures internal and external, political and economic, natural and human. The empire stretches beyond its strength. For centuries, Rome expanded across continents, building roads, fortifications, ports, and administrative systems that connected people from Britain to Syria, from Egypt to Spain. Expansion required soldiers, money, and continuous logistical support. At first, conquered territories brought wealth and resources, but maintaining control over distant regions eventually became more costly than profitable. Armies needed food, pay, and equipment. Roads required repair. Borders demanded defense. Rebellions required suppression. Bureaucracy multiplied. Resources once dedicated to public works, including aqueduct maintenance, were redirected to military survival. The Roman economy weakened. Taxation increased. Silver content in coins decreased, causing inflation. Trade networks became unstable. The population shifted, with wealth concentrating into fewer hands. Social services declined. The empire faced one crisis after another, and none were resolved completely. Each was merely contained for a time. The aqueducts, like the empire itself, became victims not of a single catastrophe, but of gradual erosion, neglect, corruption, and the quiet decay of infrastructure. The aqueducts had always required constant care. Their engines were not machines, but people. Thousands of workers performing silent tasks day after day, scraping mineral buildup from stone linings, reinforcing arches, monitoring flow levels, clearing silt from settling tanks, and replacing worn pipes. When these tasks went undone, the system faltered. During the later centuries of the empire, maintenance teams shrank. Salaries went unpaid. Equipment was reused beyond its lifespan. Official inspectors, once carefully chosen and trained, were replaced by political appointees with little technical understanding. Pipe measurements were no longer strictly controlled. Unauthorized branches multiplied. Major repair projects were postponed repeatedly, passed from one official to another who lacked funding or manpower. Even skilled engineers began to disappear, either retired without replacement or reassigned to military construction. The slow neglect had cumulative consequences. Mineral deposits built up in channels, narrowing flow until water slowed to a trickle. Small cracks became structural weaknesses. Underground sections collapsed, shifting soil and sending water spilling into earth. Minor leaks, once easily repaired, grew into major failures. Each breakdown reduced pressure in the overall system, diminishing supply to the farthest reaches of the city. Fountains that once overflowed now dripped. The luxurious, steaming bathhouses began to ration hours. People waited in lines again, just as they had centuries before the aqueducts existed, carrying jars and amphorae through crowded streets. Broken arches and enemy blades. As internal stability crumbled, external threats strengthened. Germanic tribes, long familiar with Roman borders, pressure points, and weaknesses, began to push more aggressively. Trade routes fractured. Frontier defenses became unstable. Waves of migrating peoples sought new lands and survival, colliding with Rome in increasingly violent encounters. One group in particular, the Goths, played a significant role in the story of Rome's water. In 537 AD, more than 60 years after the traditional date assigned to the fall of the Western Roman Empire for 76 AD, the Ostrogothic king Vitiges, in conflict with the Byzantine general Belisarius, ordered the aqueducts supplying Rome to be cut. The intention was simple and strategic: weaken the city without direct confrontation, remove the lifeblood, force surrender. The aqueducts had survived earthquakes, weather, corruption, and centuries of use, but they were never designed to withstand war. Arches were toppled, conduits collapsed, pipes were shattered. What once took lifetimes to build could be ruined in days. Suddenly, Rome lost its water. The baths closed permanently. Fountains ran dry. Factories ceased operation. Waste disposal systems collapsed. Disease spread. Citizens fled. The once mighty population shrank to tens of thousands. The city that had depended on engineered abundance was now unable to support itself at even a fraction of its former scale. Without water, Rome was no longer a vast metropolis. It became a struggling settlement scattered among ruins. Relearning ancient skills. For centuries, Romans had become so accustomed to abundant, flowing water that they forgot how difficult survival had once been. They had forgotten wells, cisterns, and rain collection systems. They had forgotten the daily burden carried by their ancestors. Infrastructure had eliminated hardship so effectively that people lost the knowledge to live without it. Now, with the aqueducts silent, they had to relearn skills that had vanished from cultural memory. People dug shallow wells and collected rain in buckets. They scavenged broken pipes and melted lead in small workshops, repurposing materials for tools, weapons, or simple trade goods. The bathhouses, once centers of social life, became storage rooms or fortresses. Arches were dismantled for building stone. What had once represented triumph now symbolized failure. a monument to a world that no longer existed. This process happened slowly, unevenly, and painfully. Future generations walked past aqueduct ruins without knowing how they functioned. Some saw them as decorations, others as reminders of a forgotten greatness. Many simply ignored them, growing up in a world where survival consumed every waking hour. The quiet lessons hidden in stone. When we look back today at the broken aqueducts scattered across Italy, near Rome, near Tivoli, near the Appian Way, we see more than architectural remains. We see a lesson written in stone, quietly waiting for anyone patient enough to read it. Civilization depends not just on great achievements, but on continuous maintenance. The Roman aqueducts teach us that collapse does not usually arrive with a sudden explosion, but seeps in slowly, like water eroding stone. It begins with deferred repairs, ignored warnings, misallocated resources, complacency, corruption, and the belief that systems will survive simply because they have always survived. The decline of the aqueducts did not happen because Roman engineers forgot how to build. It happened because Rome forgot the value of stewardship. And yet, even in their broken state, the aqueducts endured long enough to inspire future generations. When medieval and Renaissance builders studied them, they rediscovered techniques in surveying, arch construction, pressure control, and hydraulic management. The very ruins contributed to the rebirth of engineering knowledge. The Renaissance itself was shaped partially by the remnants of Rome's ingenuity. A final walk beneath the arches. Now picture yourself once again beneath the archways of the Aqua Claudia. But this time, instead of warm sunlight and strong stone, the air is cold. Moss clings to the base of the arches. Plants grow from cracks. The structure leans, missing stones where sections have collapsed. You can see the sky through gaps that once held water channels. The silence feels heavier. Where water once moved, wind now whistles. Where crowds once gathered to draw from fountains, only a handful of birds perch on the ruins. Where laughter echoed in vast marble baths, dust settles in layers upon broken floor tiles. There is beauty still, though of a different kind, a beauty that comes from reflection rather than triumph. A quiet beauty of memory, not power. The aqueducts, even in ruin, remind us that nothing great is built quickly and nothing great falls instantly. They ask us to imagine the hands that shaped them, the minds that measured their slopes, the backs that carried stone, the voices that planned their routes. They ask us to remember the ordinary workers whose names history ignores. They ask us to see civilization not only in monuments, but in the small daily labor that sustains them. The echo reaches forward. Today, thousands of miles of pipes carry water under modern cities. We flip a faucet and water appears. We shower without thinking. We rely on invisible networks beneath our feet. We rarely consider how fragile this convenience is. We rarely wonder who maintains the system and what happens if they stop. And perhaps, in the quiet stillness of night, in the kind of stillness where stories like this are told, there is a question waiting. How long would our own world survive if the water suddenly stopped flowing? What parts of our lives depend on systems we no longer fully understand? A legacy written in stone. You stand now in the present day, looking at the same arches that once carried water across the landscape of the ancient world. The sky above is quiet, brushed with wide stretches of pale blue. Birds move in gentle arcs through the air, landing atop stones placed centuries before their species ever perched upon them. Grass ripples in long rolling waves beneath the wind, and the great silhouettes of broken aqueducts cut across the horizon like the ribs of a long, forgotten giant, preserved in stillness. It is peaceful, and yet there is something almost overwhelming in the silence. You are not surrounded by crowds, merchants, or soldiers. There are no echoes of laughter from bathhouses, no shouts from vendors in the marketplace, no clanking of hammers striking iron in workshops fueled by running water. Instead, there is the soft rustle of leaves and the distant hum of modern life, almost indistinguishable beneath the quiet. The ruins before you are reminders, silent, unchanging reminders of what once was. The bridge between the ancient and the modern. If you stand long enough, you begin to recognize a strange truth. The world today is built on ideas first shaped here. The aqueducts are not simply relics of an ancient empire. They are the ancestors of the infrastructure that sustains modern civilization. Every time water flows from a faucet, every time a shower turns on, every time a city supplies millions of people with clean water through pipes hidden underground, we are participating in an inheritance that began more than 2,000 years ago. Roman aqueducts established principles that define modern engineering. Gravity-driven water flow across long distances, precise surveying and elevation control, settling tanks and purification systems, maintenance procedures and inspection routes, public water access infrastructure, legal regulations governing distribution and usage. They were not experiments, they were systems. Systems built slowly, improved patiently, and maintained carefully. The Romans did something extraordinary. They turned something invisible, water distribution, into something dependable, predictable, and essential. They created infrastructure that most people never thought about because it worked so well that it became invisible. And perhaps that is the greatest compliment any engineering system can receive. To be so flawlessly integrated into daily life that it goes unnoticed. The Renaissance of forgotten knowledge. When the aqueducts failed and Rome fell into decline, much of the knowledge behind them was lost. The Middle Ages saw a return to wells and rainwater collection, small cisterns, and river hauling, methods that once belonged to a world before empire. For nearly 1,000 years, Europe lacked the capacity to build structures of similar scale and sophistication. The ruins of Rome were studied like puzzles. Scholars sketched them, measured them, and wondered how ancient engineers had created such precision using simple tools. During the Renaissance, artists, architects, and scholars rediscovered the Roman principles. Figures like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Brunelleschi studied ancient ruins and reverse, engineered the techniques hidden within their stones. Architects learned again how to build arches that could carry weight without collapsing. Engineers relearned surveying, drafting, geometric planning, and the properties of materials. In other words, the aqueducts did not merely transport water, they transported knowledge across time. The stone arches, cracked and incomplete though they were, became teachers. Their endurance proved the value of durability. Their failures proved the consequences of neglect. Their presence inspired ambition, the spread of ideas across the world. As Europe modernized, cities once again grew beyond the capacity of wells and rivers. Water management became essential. Engineers built new aqueducts, canals, dams, and pipes, drawing directly from Roman models. In the 18th and 19th centuries, cities such as London, Paris, and New York constructed vast municipal water systems modeled closely on the Roman blueprint, gravity-fed, measured, regulated, and publicly managed. When water flowed into those modern cities, it brought with it more than liquid. It brought a transformation. Lower disease rates through sanitation systems, expansion of population centers, industrial growth enabled by reliable water supply, agricultural productivity through irrigation, improved public hygiene through bathhouses and household plumbing. Life expectancy increased. Urban growth accelerated. Society changed. All because water, once a burden carried by hand, became a resource carried by systems. It is remarkable to think that ordinary Roman workers, surveyors kneeling in dusty fields with wooden tools, laborers dragging stone into place, masons chiseling channels in silence, helped build the foundations of the modern world without ever knowing their true legacy. They were not building for glory or for eternity. They were building simply because the work needed to be done. The fragile balance of progress. As you continue walking along the ruins, you may begin to feel a thought settling quietly within you, a question lingering at the edge of awareness. Civilization depends not on dramatic victories or monumental achievements, but on steady, continuous maintenance. Great systems are not preserved by single acts of brilliance, but by countless small acts of responsibility. Rome did not fall because its engineers lacked skill or intelligence. It fell because the systems that sustained it were not cared for when the world around them shifted. The aqueducts remind us that progress is delicate. They remind us that the invisible networks beneath our feet, water supply, electricity, transportation, food distribution, communications, are just as fragile now as Rome's once were. If they fail, modern cities could collapse with a speed that would surprise anyone who has never lived without them. We like to believe that our world is stronger, safer, and more advanced. But standing under the shadow of the aqueduct ruins, we are forced to ask, are we truly more secure than the Romans were? Or have we simply forgotten how dependent we are on systems we rarely think about? A moment of stillness. The sun begins to lower in the sky, casting long golden light across the stones. The arches glow softly, their weathered surfaces illuminated in warm hues. There is a calmness here, a silence that feels almost sacred. You can imagine the voices of centuries carried gently on the wind, not loud speeches or triumphant declarations, but the quiet footsteps of ordinary workers, the sound of tools striking stone, the murmur of water flowing through channels now dry. You realize that history is not shaped only by emperors or armies. It is shaped by builders, planners, maintainers, people whose names are lost, but whose work remains. It is shaped by perseverance, by patience, and by the willingness to do tasks that appear small but make life sustainable. In the soft fading light, the aqueducts feel less like ruins and more like reminders. They speak not of destruction, but of endurance. They remind us that the future is built by hands we never see and minds we never praise. They remind us that progress is never guaranteed and decline is never sudden. They ask us to look inward, to observe our own time, to understand the fragile balance that carries water through pipes beneath our cities and electricity through wires overhead. The final reflection. You stand in silence a moment longer, watching the last sliver of sunlight disappear behind the stone arches. A cool wind begins to rise, moving gently through tall grass and past the ancient stones. The sky darkens, the stars appear, and in this quiet moment, one question remains, suspended softly in the darkness. What will the ruins of our civilization look like thousands of years from now? And will future generations learn from us as we learn from Rome? A message across an empire. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the vastness of the ancient world more than 2,500 years ago. It is the 6th century BC, long before steel ships crossed oceans or telegraph wires stretched across continents. It is a time before steam power, electricity, or printed maps. Kingdoms rise and fall not by how loudly they command, but by how quickly they can send and receive information. In an age when messages must travel by foot, boat, or animal, the speed of communication is often the difference between survival and collapse. You stand at the edge of the Persian Empire, the empire founded by Cyrus the Great, expanded by Cambyses, and perfected by Darius I. It stretches across a landscape so immense it is difficult to comprehend. From the mountains of Anatolia to the fertile plains of Mesopotamia, from the deserts of Egypt to the rugged highlands of Afghanistan, from the plains near the Indus River to the shores of the Mediterranean, the empire covers more than 8 million square kilometers. It includes dozens of cultures, languages, climates, and beliefs. No empire in history has ever united so many distant lands under a single rule. And yet, the greatest challenge is not conquering territory, it is controlling it. For an emperor sitting in the grand capital city of Persepolis, ruling such a massive territory requires knowing what is happening in every distant province. A rebellion at a remote border must be reported immediately. Tax records must be delivered accurately. Military orders must be distributed clearly. If a governor acts with corruption or disloyalty, the emperor must learn quickly. A world-spanning empire cannot be managed by guesswork. Most rulers throughout history struggled under these conditions. Time and distance defeated them. By the time news arrived, situations had changed. Messages carried by foot travelers could take months. Caravans moved slowly across mountains and deserts. River travel depended on weather and chance. Misunderstandings, delays, and misinformation toppled kingdoms as surely as invading armies. But the Persians, guided by administrative brilliance rather than theatrical heroism, understood something profoundly simple. Information is power, and the fastest messenger is more valuable than the strongest army. The birth of the Royal Road. At the heart of the Persian logistical miracle was a system known as the Royal Road, a carefully constructed route that connected the empire from end to end. Stretching nearly 2,700 kilometers, it ran from Sardis in modern-day Turkey to Susa in Iran, crossing plains, mountains, and rivers. Unlike ordinary dirt paths, The royal road was engineered with attention to detail. Smooth surfaces in many places, stone paving where necessary, bridges built across rivers, and watchtowers placed for safety. Along this road, precisely spaced approximately every 25 to 30 miles, were relay stations, known as prowess, resting places stocked with supplies. Each station held fresh horses, food, shelter, and officials trained to receive and dispatch messages. The distance between stations was carefully chosen, long enough to maximize efficiency, but short enough that a single horse could gallop with speed without collapsing. Ordinary caravans might take 3 months to cross the empire, but a Persian royal courier could do the journey in 7 to 9 days, a speed so astonishing for the time that it became almost legendary. The postal riders, silent heroes of the empire. Imagine standing beside the royal road at dawn. A thin orange light rises over distant hills. The air is cool, carrying the scent of dry earth and the faint sound of wind brushing through low desert grass. You hear nothing at first, only stillness. And then, gradually, a low rhythmic thunder emerges in the distance. A cloud of dust appears at the horizon. A horseman comes into view, riding fast, leaning forward, eyes fixed ahead. He carries a leather satchel strapped to his chest, sealed with wax. He does not slow as he nears the relay station. Instead, he shouts a signal. Another rider, already prepared with a fresh horse, leaps forward. In a swift motion, the satchel is passed from one rider to the next. No pause, no rest, no hesitation. The second rider is off within seconds, disappearing as quickly as he arrived. The first dismounts, breathes heavily, his horse trembling and soaked with sweat. There is no applause, no ceremony, no public admiration. Their work is silent, repetitive, and tiring. Yet these unnamed riders carry the lifeline of the empire. Without them, governors act freely, armies move blindly, and the emperor rules in darkness. The Greek historian Herodotus, who traveled through Persian lands in the 5th century BC, wrote with admiration, "Neither snow nor rain, nor heat nor darkness of night prevents these couriers from completing their assigned journey with the greatest speed." These words, written nearly 2,500 years ago, would later become the unofficial motto of the modern postal service. More than messages, moving the machinery of empire. The Persian courier system carried much more than routine correspondence. It transported military orders that determined the outcome of campaigns, tax reports that shaped the empire's economy, census records to allocate resources and soldiers, diplomatic messages sent across kingdoms, legal mandates and administrative decrees, intelligence reports and warnings of local unrest. Speed allowed the empire to respond before crises grew. Rebellions could be contained early. Armies could be moved strategically rather than reactively. Disputes could be settled before they ignited into violence. Governors knew they were watched, and therefore behaved more carefully. In essence, the postal system served as the nervous system of the empire, transmitting signals that told the body how to act. The invisible infrastructure behind power. Most people living within the Persian Empire would never witness a courier riding past. They would never see messages exchanged at relay stations or read the wax-sealed letters carried across impossible distances. To the average citizen, life moved at a slow pace. Farmers tending wheat and barley fields, shepherds guiding flocks along dusty paths, merchants selling spices and fabrics in crowded market squares. Communication happened face to face, in small villages far removed from the affairs of the imperial court. The greatness of the postal network lay in its invisibility. It did not celebrate itself. It did not demand recognition. It simply existed, quietly and efficiently supporting a world larger than any one person could comprehend. The empire appeared strong because information moved without delay, and strength built on speed is a kind of quiet perfection. The beauty of efficiency. There is nothing dramatic about record keeping, logistical planning, or route maintenance. There are no sculptures, legends, or poems praising surveyors measuring distance or workers repairing mile markers in silence. There are no heroic stories about stable keepers feeding horses at relay stations through freezing winter nights. Their hands cracked and raw, their bodies stiff from cold. And yet, these mundane tasks held an empire together. The royal road required constant care. Stones replaced after storms, bridges reinforced, bandits driven away, water sources maintained, distances remeasured, schedules checked. The postal system demanded bodily endurance. Riders trained to survive harsh climate, dangerous terrain, and relentless pace. Horses were rotated frequently, their health checked carefully, their fatigue monitored. A single broken horse or injured courier could delay messages that determined the fate of thousands. Like Rome's aqueducts, the Persian post thrived not through dramatic innovation, but through constant disciplined maintenance. The quiet strength of organization. Cyrus the Great, the founder of the empire, was known not only for his conquests, but for his ability to unify diverse cultures. Darius, his successor, transformed a kingdom into a structured state. He reorganized the empire into administrative provinces called satrapies, each governed locally but connected directly to the throne. Taxes, military contributions, and legal authority depended on accurate information and fast communication. Without the postal riders, the satrapy system would collapse. Authority would fragment. Local leaders would sever ties. The empire would crack from the edges inward. Instead, the Persian Empire endured for more than 2 centuries, supported not by legend, but by logistics, predictable, measurable, unglamorous logistics. The true empire was not made of palaces or armies, but of information moving faster than the problem it needed to solve. A single message. Imagine, now, a single small clay tablet sealed with wax, carried by a rider galloping across an endless stretch of road. To an outsider, it seems insignificant, a tiny object, easily overlooked or destroyed. Yet inside may be a command that will move tens of thousands of soldiers, or a warning that will prevent a war, or a policy that will change the life of a province forever. Tiny messages can carry enormous power. The writer does not read the words he carries. He does not know the impact they will have. He only knows that he must deliver them, no matter the weather, the danger, or the fatigue pressing into his bones. There is a quiet dignity in that kind of labor, the dignity of small tasks whose importance is understood only by those who rely on them. The question begins to form. As the sun sets behind distant mountains and the road glows faintly in the dimming light. You watch another rider disappear into the horizon, his horse kicking up dust that sparkles briefly in the last fragments of daylight. The world feels still. The silence stretches wide.